The ways that it had been represented.
The old way of thinking.
It's just a vanity thing. You want to look like a runway model.
Dealing with anxiety, self-confidence.
I focused a lot on my body and the way it looked and losing weight. But that had nothing to do with what was going on. There was so much anxiety and feelings of not being good enough and not living up to my potential. I focused on my body and the calories I was putting into my body and how much I could work out and the numbers of losing weight because I could control that.
I think I would have felt more comfortable acknowledging that I personally struggled from an eating disorder if I'd seen it represented in different ways, because I didn't understand that it could come from deeper personal issues related to trying to find a way to take control of your life when you feel like your life's out of control, things like that. And so for me, it was just out of the question that I could suffer from it.
The food is just a mask for deeper inner turmoil.
It's an emotional, psychological conflict.
Because it's what that food represents. It's a control issue.
Common misconception that eating disorders are about food. They're not about food. Eating disorders are often an affect regulation tool, the way that we make ourselves feel less pain, or the way that we distract ourselves from our feelings of being out of control in our life.
The beginnings of what eventually became my eating disorder, they date back to when I was, 5 or 6 years old. Like, just a feeling of not being acceptable, not being okay. That didn't manifest in food or body until I was in adolescence. There were years where I just went around feeling like there was just something so wrong with me. And to say that that's just about food is just, ridiculous.
By the time you're 40 or 50 or 60, there's so much to undo.
I've suffered from it for 30 years.
More issues and more problems that go unsolved. And the reality is that people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s have eating disorders. I know them because they're dear clients of mine. And I think the myth that this is a young person's disease, that it's a phase, that it's, society when you're in your developing mind, it's like, okay, those things can be true, but they're only half of the truth. I don't know that it actually gets any better the longer that people suffer with this illness.
I have a client or someone who's a part of a pro bono group that I was doing who is 73 years old, and she has been struggling with her eating disorder for 50 years.
I think men are suffering in invisible ways.
And they're scared to come out.
They were shocked that he'd been struggling with an eating disorder.
25% of the people that have eating disorders are males, and they're scared to come forward because they're worried that they're going to get judged because they're not a typical man or how a man's supposed to be.
It's known as a women's disorder, and so if you're a man and you are suffering from an eating disorder, then you have that whole other layer of what's wrong with me, that I have a women's illness.
I think the culture of sort of hypermasculinity that we're in, and the masculinities that are predominant right now, are about being tough, being, taking care of yourself, being a provider, having it all together. And with that goes a great amount of emotional avoidance about anything vulnerable. Yeah, there's a lot of queer people that are coming through the doors of residential care these days and are coming through our doors as private clinicians. And I think they're actually in a worse off state because they might have health practitioners that don't even know about their gender identity or their sexuality. And now they've got an eating disorder to boot, or depression or anxiety that's already mismanaged because they're like underserved medically.
When they lump it in with other mental illnesses, it doesn't work the same way.
That they are living with all at once.
That's a serious mental illness. Generally speaking, they come comorbid with other different issues like depression, anxiety, substance use. I think you see one or more of those things tied in with an eating disorder.
I seldom, if ever, have seen a client come in that hasn't been struggling with anxiety, typically with depression as well. Often they will have other coping mechanisms that fall into mental health disorders, like different addictions. They self-harm. They never exist on their own.
We're not actually ending up addressing eating disorders. Often we're ending up addressing disordered eating, or we're ending up addressing body dissatisfaction or cultural problems. It's acceptable for eating disorder organizations to post stats on childhood dieting and on Barbies and modeling and on obesity, and this is all a distraction against what an eating disorder is, and we're spending too much time distracting the general public and practitioners and researchers and sufferers with these aspects that have some relation but aren't the real thing.
For the most part, people just looked at me confused.
It's like, well, you look good. You don't know why I look good.
It's much deeper than that. If somebody is heavier, they may not present as an eating disorder. But that doesn't tell you what the racing thoughts are like inside their head, the self-esteem issues that they're struggling with. That doesn't tell you that they've purged 5 times that day. They're in agony and that they need some help. You can't tell just by the physical presentation. It's much deeper than that.
It's like, well, you look good. It's like, you don't know why I look good.
People just looked at me confused. Well, you look fine. You don't look sick.
Some people can't feel open to be their authentic selves and really share what they're going through.
This is not something that is being chosen.
It's the fight of their life.
But nobody chooses a mental health disorder. The shift we need to have culturally is that we acknowledge that eating disorders are a mental health disorder. It's as though there's a title slapped on it, but we don't actually address it as a mental health disorder.
That this is something that I am actively trying to get out of. I want to change, and I need support to get there.
People need to know that eating disorders, in adolescence, it's not a fad. It's not a phase. Nobody signs up for an eating disorder. With time and with love and with support, most of our patients are able to absolutely appreciate that recovery is worth fighting for. For a lot of them, it's the fight of their life.